Crash Bandicoot. At last, I, the great Neocortex, have you right where I want you. And now, the final blow!
Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time feels like the sequel that we never got to Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped that fans truly deserved. Welcome, I am MisterBo, and here is my impression of Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time. So we're going to break this video down into 3 different sections. Firstly, we're going to be starting off talking about the story, pros and cons. We'll then move over into gameplay, again pros and cons, and at the end I will give you my final thoughts on the game. Now I will caution you before watching this video, the gameplay you're going to be seeing in this video is from across multiple different levels in the game, some near the beginning, some near the middle, and some near the end. However, I won't be including any cutscenes or any story spoilers in the actual gameplay itself. So let's start off with the pros. This feels like a classic Crash Bandicoot story, more similar to what we saw in Crash 1, 2 and 3, and not those later games like Twinsanity, Mind Over Mutant, etc. The story starts with Entropy and Cortex being stuck in the time prison where we last saw them at the end of Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, and thanks to Uka Uka, they actually escape but leave him behind. Entropy's grand plan is to be able to control these dimensions and wipe them out. And of course, it's up to Crash and friends to stop them. We then move on to Crash, and we see Crash is awoken by Aku Aku, and you're then tasked to go and find Lani Loli, the first quantum mask that will give you the ability to phase shift between objects. Now, throughout the entire story, there are a ton of cool references and nods to previous games in the franchise, both in cutscenes and dialogue, but also in the environments themselves. For instance, some of my favourites that I saw were things like in Offbeat in the Mosquito Marsh dimension, there is a poster for Pinstripe saying that he's wanted and there is a reward for him. In the same level, you will see blow up balloons for both Spyro, Pura, and even a Skylander character. And then in later levels like Out for Launch in the Bermugula's Orbit dimension, you'll see an image taken straight from Twinsanity of the evil twins. There are a ton of cool references like this scattered throughout the game. One of my favourites is a little bit later on in the game, which I won't spoil, but it is to do with Crash Team Racing. All these little hints of things here and there just help build this story out and makes those who are a fan of the games that came after Warped still feel like those games were relevant and have a place in this new timeline. There is a great variety in levels. There are 43 levels in total, including the optional levels where you get to play as Cortex, Torna, and Dingodile, and 29 mainline levels for Crash and Coco. There are 10 dimensions in total, which keeps the levels feeling fresh and unique each time. I never felt like I was playing the exact same level or I got bored of an environment. Just as you'd maybe played 3 or 4 in one dimension, it then took you to a new dimension and you were seeing a completely brand new environment. Not only that, there is a great sense of progression as you're making your way through these different dimensions, and I feel like we get a greater variety in levels than we have done in previous Crash Bandicoot titles. Now the story does flow well from level to level and dimension to dimension. You can do what I did and play just through the Crash and Coco levels and beeline it straight to the end, or if you want to, you can go back and play these optional levels that will give you a greater sense of the story going on for characters like Torna and Dingodile. There are few enemies in this game, only 2 of which were not actually previously revealed before this game got announced. But I will say the highlight for me was certainly Embryo. Playing through the levels where Embryo is sort of taunting you and just chatting to you is a great addition, and you get the same thing with Engine as well. As you're making your way through these levels, these villains are talking to you and referencing things that have happened in the past. Not only that, the characters of each of the 4 quantum masks, so Lani Loli, Capunawa, Akano and Ika Ika, are also a great addition and fit in with Aku Aku and Uka Uka as masks that feel like they've been in Crash from the very start. Now that is what I liked about the story. Let's move into some things that I wasn't that keen on. The story itself does feel slightly rushed in a way that there are a lot of loose ends that aren't really explained or tied together in the end of the campaign. There is a character that pops up near the end of the game, and it isn't really ever explained how this character sort of came to be. They just suddenly appear. I'd have just liked to see a little cutscene that maybe introduced this character in a better way. Now of course I haven't done 100% of this game, I haven't collected all the gems, but it also feels like the end of this game didn't really amount to much. There's no sort of tease or ending that maybe hints at a sequel from what I've seen so far, but of course there could always be a hidden cutscene that is hidden behind getting all the gems, etc., like we have seen in previous Crash titles. Now, one thing I would have liked to have seen more of is more classic Crash Bandicoot characters. Again, there were only 2 additional characters in this game that we hadn't seen prior to the launch, and well, one of them was a great addition and is a fan favorite that I think a lot of people will be happy to see back. The other was a cool addition, but I don't think really served much to the story, and again could have done with some more backstory or some explanation as to why they were there. Another thing I would have liked to have seen a lot more of is more mask interaction. The masks again had great personalities, but I feel like later in the game there wasn't really much interaction with them, and I feel like they could have had a little bit more time to shine. With that being said though, the overall story for this game is solid, and as I said at the beginning, is certainly sequel material for Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. The cutscenes and animation alone are fantastic. We get more storytelling in this game than I think we did in the entire Insane trilogy, and I will say Dingo Dar's cutscenes are a highlight for sure. From there though, let's talk about the actual gameplay. So let's start off with the pros. Firstly, talking about the feel of this game, because it feels exactly like you'd expect a Crash Bandicoot game to feel. Toys for Bob have nailed it here. After the remakes of Crash 1, 2 and 3 that were highly praised, Crash Bandicoot 4 takes it to another level, introducing brand new mechanics in the 4 quantum masks, as well as introducing brand new gameplay elements like wall running, rope swinging, and sliding, which just fit naturally into Crash's moveset. There is also a great learning curve here. The first couple of levels in the first 2 or 3 dimensions are not that hard, they're quite a breeze, but as you get into some of those later dimensions, the game starts throwing more at you, and by the time you've made it to that final dimension, you're going to be flicking through different masks in a matter of seconds, and if you're struggling with using a certain mask, you better get good at using it, because you certainly are going to need to get good to complete this game. One thing that I was worried about going into this game was whether or not those new mask abilities would start to feel a little bit gimmicky, and by the end of the game I was just dreading using them. And I can say it's completely the opposite. Again, they feel like they fit into this game. Every time these mask abilities are used, it's always in a fun and clever way. At the beginning of the game, it's fairly simple, but again, as you get to those later levels, it starts getting more complex. Firstly, you may be using one mask and then switching to another mask in a section, and then again in some of those later levels, it will be a matter of seconds where you're flicking between all 4 different masks, and it is absolute hell, but in a really good way, and a way that feels super rewarding when you actually manage to complete it. Now, something that did start to feel a little bit gimmicky was the alt characters you can play as. So you can play as Cortex, Torna, and Dingo Dar. I will say Dingo Dar's levels felt the best for me in terms of gameplay. It never really felt stale and I never really had a problem. However, with Cortex's levels and Torna, they sometimes felt a little bit finicky here and there, trying to make sure you're hitting things, especially with Cortex's ray gun. You could only really fire in a straight line, meaning if you were trying to get a box or something, you had to make sure you were standing right in front of it or right to the side of it. There were a few occasional times where I did get a little bit frustrated, but again, these are optional levels, so if they are something that doesn't really suit your playstyle, then you don't have to do them. There's only about 5 or 6 times where you're kind of forced into them. Now, there is tons of replayability in this game. I've played through the entire campaign, but I've got to go back and get all the hidden gems throughout each of the levels. Each level gives you a total of 6 gems to collect. 3 of those are for getting a certain amount of Wumpa Fruit, 1 of those is for getting every single crate, 1 of those is for making it through a level without dying more than 3 times, and sometimes you'll have hidden gems that are just located in hard to reach places. You can then play the exact same level again in an inverted mode, which adds a cool, fun mechanic to the level, as well as a visual style change, and it mirrors the entire level. That will then introduce you brand new gems, and these gems are then used to unlock a vast variety of different skins for Crash and Coco. On top of that, you can then play through the levels again in relic mode, trying to beat different times to get yourself the Sapphire, Gold and Platinum relic. On top of that, there is then the flashback tapes, which require you to get to a certain point in a level without dying once in order to get this tape, which unlocks a brand new style of play called flashback tapes, which are basically challenge rooms, and they are pretty hard. And then finally, 4 levels throughout the entire campaign have hidden gems in them. 4 different colored gems, red, blue, green and yellow, and you might need to do a little bit of detective work in order to find out how you actually go about unlocking those gems. As to what they unlock though, well, I'm still trying to figure that out for myself. There are also some things that I didn't really like about the gameplay, some of which I have already spoken about, but one I found quite annoying was in a mask section. If you are dying repeatedly, you will be hearing that mask a lot every time you spawn, to the point where it does get super annoying, and I wish I could have just muted the game and not had to hear this mask say whatever line it says every time you spawn in. And one big upset which I had high hopes going into were boss fights. The first boss fight where you fight Engine is super refreshing, and it doesn't feel like a boss fight we've had in previous Crash Bandicoot games. It has certain levels to it. You're dodging these incoming attacks by either jumping, sliding, and then an enemy will appear. You have to spin into that enemy and he will go flying into the boss and take down a section of health. It is then up to you to make your way to the boss using different mask abilities and then spin Engine. And that was a cool mechanic. But unfortunately, that same mechanic is pretty much just copy and pasted throughout each of the different bosses. Every boss has some sort of dodge gameplay. Something is coming at you and you either need to jump, slide, or just move out the way. Sometimes you'll be able to slow down the incoming projectiles, and sometimes you'll be able to flip gravity and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it felt like every boss had an enemy that would spawn, you would go up to that boss, spin it, and it would hit the boss and take down a health bar. I think the boss that was probably the most fun and had the most variety was certainly Entropy. With all that being said though, as I've said already, this is a true sequel to Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, and it's a great starting off point for a brand new series of Crash Bandicoot games, hopefully also helmed by Toys for Bob, because they did a brilliant job with this. And yes, we have been seeing Activision sort of switch between developers for different games. I think Activision needs to just stick with Toys for Bob on this one. They've got a great basis here, and I'm sure they can build upon this and make it even better in future titles. I'm excited to see what they could do, and I'm also excited to see where the Crash Bandicoot story is going to go from here. Again, there's a lot of loose ends, but they could be easily answered and could have a lot of intriguing possibilities going forward. Now, I don't usually like to give games a number out of 10, but I will give Crash Bandicoot 4 a number out of 10, and I will give it a 9.3. This game is exceptional. We've been waiting for a new Crash Bandicoot game for so long, and it certainly has delivered. So there you have it. That is my impression on Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time. Let me know in the comments below if you're excited for it or not. If you did enjoy this impression/review video, then be sure to click the like button. If you're new around here, then make sure you subscribe. There'll be a ton of Crash Bandicoot 4 content and coverage up on the channel over the next couple of days and weeks that you won't want to miss. If you'd like to, you can stay up to date with myself by following me over on Twitter at @IamMisterBo, a link to that in the description below. Apart from all of that though, thank you very much for watching, I really do appreciate it. Hopefully I will see you in a future video, but as always, until then, make sure you take care. Bye bye.